Chapter 22. The Temper of Dylan. As Sky and Jesse ran for the truck, the men stayed back to make sure Frankie wouldn't follow. Sky wasn't sure how they would do that until the sound of fists against flesh came from the house. She hesitated as she reached toward Jesse's quaking body. Sky felt dizzy and numb. She couldn't imagine how the encounter affected him. Though Jesse didn't lean into her, he accepted her touch. "It's okay now, Jesse. You're safe, it's all over," Sky said with a gentle whisper. His eyes wide, Jesse glanced back over his shoulder a few times. When he didn't see his father following, his shaking slowed. With a bowed head, Jesse asked, "Are they beaten on my dad in there?" Sky winced and shot a look toward the house. "I believe they are." Jesse signed, "Can't say I'm sorry about it." Sky brushed the hair from his eyes. "You don't have to be. Not today." After getting him settled in the truck's cab, Sky stood on the running boards and fished around the truck bed for her backpack. It held a first aid kit, food, and water. She had packed it for any need Jesse would have. Of course, it had to be in the middle, covered with camping supplies. Spying a strap, Sky grasped it and pulled. When she almost slipped from her perch, she grabbed onto the side of the truck to steady herself. Busy at her task, Sky heard a vague, "Hey," but paid no attention to it. "I said hey," Dylan said louder as he stormed toward her. Sky twisted toward him, her heart sinking when she saw his angry face. "What is wrong with you, girl?" Unable to avoid facing him, Sky raised her eyes to meet Dylan's turbulent dark blue stare. "Uh-oh." Sky teetered uncertainly on the running board. Dylan reached out and grabbed her arm. When she stumbled backward, he took her other one. With his hands wrapped tight around both Sky's upper arms, he set her down and righted her, causing a flicker of a memory. She glanced at his face. As angry as he was, she had expected him to be rougher. Just as quick as he had put his hands on her, they were gone. Sky licked her dry lips. What kinda half-wit, foolhardy move was that?" Dylan scowled at Sky. Her thoughtless actions could have put them all in danger if the situation had been any different. Still agitated after the encounter with Frankie, Dylan's angry words irritated Sky. Besides that, now she was on the ground, he seemed to tower over her. She didn't like that, the way he tried to use his size to intimidate her. She took a step back only to bump into the vehicle. "Excuse me? Did you not hear me in there?" His arm made a wide arc at the house. "I said stop. Did you hear me say stop?" "Please, I don't want to upset Jesse," Sky said as she nodded Jesse's way. She took a few steps to the back of the truck with Dylan on her heels. She needn't have worried. Jesse would hardly think this qualified as an argument. Sky took a breath and smoothed her face as she began her explanation. "Yes, but I couldn't stop. I had to." Again, Dylan interrupted her, his accent thickening the angrier he became. He laid a hand on the tailgate beside her and snarled, "You got any clue what coulda happened in there?" "To Jesse? To you? You don't know nothin'. When I say somethin', you listen." The man's indignation caused her anxiety to build. But something bold and strong flickered in Sky. She pushed herself to her tiptoes and said, Excuse me, but no. I needed to get Jesse out of there. That is all I thought about, and I'd do it again." Thrown by her resistance, Dylan's eyes widened, and he stepped back. Dylan narrowed his eyes. "You asked for help, then ignore what I say. What you did was dangerous." Sky threw her hands up, "All I asked from you was a ride." "You need a lot more than a ride, lady." Dylan's breath fanned across her face before he made an abrupt turn and headed for the cab. He tipped his head toward the truck and threw out one last order over his shoulder. You better get your tail on that seat before I leave ya. Sky rolled her eyes behind his back as she moved toward the front of the vehicle. She ran a hand down the red truck as she walked, taking a few deep breaths to calm herself. She had dealt with angry people many, many times. If the children weren't angry, their parents often were. It was her job to be the calm in the center of the storm. Or sometimes storms. And let's count them today. 1, 2, 3. Sky glanced at Dylan as she moved to the passenger's side, her stomach still knotted from their encounter. He is the owner of one very quick, boiling temper. It surprised him I didn't fold at once. A lot of people must bend to the temper of Dylan. It wasn't the only thing she'd noticed about him and his brother. As glad as she was for their help, their faults were piling up against them. The two large men were loaded with weapons and anger issues. That is frightening in a normal world, and nothing is normal now. I don't know these men, I only met them a couple hours ago. They could be capable of anything. This just doesn't work, especially given Jessie's fragile state. Sky bit her cheek and calmed her nerves by reminding herself that she and Jessie would be on their way soon. This time tomorrow, we'll be sitting on Mom and Dad's back porch sipping tea. As Sky got in the truck, Dylan sat in the driver's seat picking at his battered hands. He ignored her as she settled herself beside Jessie. She looked away. She wanted to use the men's beating of Frankie as more evidence in her case against them, but she knew that wasn't fair. Dylan had gotten those bloody knuckles helping her. Her only emotions were relief he had been there and guilt he was hurt saving her and Jessie. Sky set her backpack between her feet and reached in it. Here, I have a small med kit. Do you want something from it? No. Sky looked from Dylan to the kit and back again. He was clearly still steaming. In fact, he was tearing at the skin of his hands with more force since she'd spoken to him. Man, can I say or do nothing right for this guy? Sky gently laid the first aid kit on the dashboard and turned to pile a few items of food between her and Jessie. Wade's head popped in through the back window to the bed of the truck, where he was settling in for the ride. His hungry gaze took in Sky's moderate offering. Hey, what do you got there? He said. A little food? I could use some. It surprised Sky that she could tense any further, but she did. His voice needled her. I'm getting food out for Jessie, she said. Her words came sharper and quicker than she intended. For some reason she didn't yet understand, Wade annoyed her. You got something for me? No, she thought, you wanted to leave Jessie there. She avoided looking at Wade and continued to pile stuff on the bench. Sure, she said. Good, he said, as he reached down to her pile and rifled through it. Sky pushed Wade's hand away from the packages. Let Jessie choose first. Sure thing. Wade accepted her request and waited until Jessie took one, then grabbed a handful and pulled them up through the window. He uttered a loud, long laugh at his haul and Sky's obvious displeasure. That was a lot. Sky said. Are you really gonna hold back on us? After everything we helped you with? Truckin' ya all the way over here? Helping with the boy and all? You didn't want to help. She pointed out. Wade hung his head. I did. It's just, well, nobody ever helps with that sort of thing. If that is the case, then they are wrong. Her eyes flashed with the fire of her conviction. Everyone should help with that sort of thing. So, you want your food back, he offered. She sighed, upset now more with herself than him. Wade was right, most people avoided helping with domestic situations. But there was no denying that in the end, he'd helped get Jessie, the least she could do is share a few snacks. No, of course not. Take something if you're hungry. Give Dylan some too. As Wade and Dylan snatched up the food, Sky scolded herself. Why do I let their high-handed attitudes get to me so much? It's not like I'll be with them much longer. I can handle it. As the men devoured the food, she turned her attention to the boy. Jesse, is there anything from the house you want or need? Decisive, he said, no. I just want away. Are you sure? Nothing, Jesse? We may not be back for a while. Dylan gave Sky a sidelong stare that said, You think we're coming back here? But it was important to leave that door open for Jesse. Sky didn't want him to get upset about leaving when that is what they needed to do. No, I ain't got nothing in there I want or need. The place is a dump. Jesse said. Dylan tipped his head toward Jesse and gave him a wink while he gunned the truck. We're gonna get gone then. Yeah. Jesse replied with a small grin. Sky smiled. There is nothing like the sound of a loud engine to perk a boy right up. As Dylan drove, Sky continued to fuss over Jesse, asking whether anything felt odd or broken and if the old wounds had been healing well. Jesse went along with all her questions until she pulled at the back of his shirt to look over any new cuts. He strongly objected and scooted from her. Sky stopped, but Jesse still kept his head tucked away from her. Dylan spoke to Jesse in such a tender voice Sky looked at him in surprise. I know, boy, Dylan said, I do. But you don't want them gettin' infected. Let her look them over. Perhaps because Dylan's usual way was to grind out words, his advice made an impression on Jesse. While he still didn't like her examination, he no longer fought her. Sky's heart hung in her chest as she examined Jesse's bruised and welted back. But she was happy to see most of the marks should disappear within a couple of weeks. Dylan scrutinized every move Sky made tending Jesse. Clearly, this level of kind attention was something foreign to him. His eyes lingered on her soothing hand as it brushed back Jesse's hair, on the boy's small nods to her caring questions, and on Jesse's face when the boy laid his head against Sky's shoulder. Once Jesse was quiet, Sky looked at Dylan from under her lashes. From the beginning, she'd known the men had a rough childhood. Their behavior, along with the numerous faded burn scars on their arms and shoulders from lit cigarettes, was a dead giveaway. But the sadness in Dylan's eyes haunted her. He didn't know what it felt like to have someone love him enough to care for him. Sky wondered if his upbringing had been even more grim than she'd already assumed. She watched the first aid kit rattle along the dash of the truck, wishing she could turn back time and tend to his injuries.